Hello everyone, today we read and comment the 40th paragraph of the second chapter of the second book of von Clausewitz Vom Kriege, the title being "This explains the rapid growth of great generals and why a general is not a man of learning." The text follows. This result of our considerations is in fact necessary. Any other would have made us distrustful of their accuracy. Only thus is explained how so often men have made their appearance with great success in war, and indeed in the higher ranks, even in supreme command, whose pursuits had been previously of a totally different nature. Indeed, how, as a rule, the most distinguished generals have never risen from the very learned or really erudite class of officers, but have been mostly men who, from the circumstances of their position, could not have attained to any great amount of knowledge. On that account, those who have considered it necessary, or even beneficial, to commence the education of a future general by instruction in all details have always been ridiculed as absurd pedants. It would be easy to show the injurious tendency of such a course, because the human mind is trained by the knowledge imparted to it and the direction given to its ideas. Only what is great can make it great. The little can only make it little, if the mind itself does not reject it as a something repugnant. So this paragraph is actually very interesting. Von Clausewitz comes back with it on the topic of essentially, with the commander, typically speaking, as a person, right? And there is no answer to this, because we have seen in previous videos that von Clausewitz makes the case of, several combinations of, character, temper, natures, let's say, and specific qualities that are required for command. And not only in the sense that there is combat at the same time, and naturally maybe a good general can be a bad soldier and vice versa, right? So it really depends, it varies widely. But this paragraph is mostly concentrated rather on realizing that there is an impossibility also in here to pretend to educate someone, to have an actual military talent, in, let's say, starting from details, starting from things that basically are impractical, are kind of abstract, and have to do with a sort of pedant form of theoretical education that is effectively detached to the practical reality, and also its technicalities, of course, but that, the knowledge of which basically comes progressively and quite spontaneously for those people who are already substantially versed for that specific role of command, right? And this is very important as a concept, because rather than telling us actually who is the person who generally goes in command, as even the title says, it actually makes you understand how there is a sort of automatic system that sorts out actually the best commanders. I mean, it doesn't happen all the times. Like, for political and social reasons, there can be all types of, of rivalries and injustice. Think about here von Clausewitz is coming out of the Napoleonic era, right? He has witnessed essentially the death of the Ancien Regime that also actually his own country represented before the disaster of Vienna Auerstedt, and that eventually transitioned, also thanks to him in his master, into something different, into a national, statal national army, like the one that essentially the French Revolution had created, and lots of things changed in this regard. So that's an example that naturally, as we know, prevented even some of these. This was a shared problem. It happened to, think about Austria, for example. All these armies that fought and lost against Napoleon because their political rather than military model was fundamentally if not obsolete as such, but it definitely had a great disadvantage in that specific moment in history with that levels, those levels of production in now a kind of an industrial world now, and with those war of masses of nations of peoples like the Napoleonic Wars actually became. But what von Clausewitz is stressing here is therefore, and that contextual notation makes you understand it better, that there is that first of all things are kind of simpler than they seem. We have seen it even in the previous paragraph that actually talked exactly about this, that a great simplification of the knowledge is required in order to effectively concretize, let's say, the theory of the art of war, and as a consequence, and this is the title of this paragraph, that this explains the rapid growth of great generals and why a general is not a man of learning, or at least what it actually means in here is that it's not that generals are not men of learning. There were generals that were greatly educated for that matter, but the point is that it doesn't necessarily has to be a person who is taught to be so to be actually a good general, because there are certain qualities that at that point will serve to that role and that emerge from effectively practice, right? This is very important to bear in mind, and this is naturally a criticism to intellectualism as such, but always in the measure that naturally evaluates reason and intelligence, and therefore what von Clausewitz is telling us here is that you don't necessarily need to read entire books about how technically you have to wage you have to operate an army, let's say, you have to command an army for actually knowing how to do it when time comes, right? And it's kind of controversial because it naturally detaches from this side of the story the actual training that is of course required to know how to do the thing, and also the military historical education that we have seen in many occasions to be dramatically important for completing actually the education of especially of a commander. But not this is not sufficient by itself to actually create a good commander, right? Because in the essence, the good commander is so for things that elude these specific aspects that naturally help, but that also have to leave this person kind of free to be and to learn by itself, right? So this is the kind of learning he's talking about, not the one you can find in manuals, right? And this fits with the broader realization that the Vom Kriege is not about actually, let's say, telling you what you have to do next step. Hence, you read the Vom Kriege, you know how to be a good general. No book can tell you that, right? There are certain things you can do with books as well that can help you, right? But that's not by the greatest majority what actually will make you a general. And we don't realize here how even difficult it is to even know it before. In fact, von Clausewitz in this paragraph says that sometimes it's even unexpected that a person coming from a certain background will eventually be better than others, right? He had even, think about Jomini, that was his greatest rival in this sense. He was actually a civilian, right? And eventually he came to this very prominent role in the military staff of Napoleon himself, in this, even with this theoretical production that had an immense success among the military at the time. Differently from von Clausewitz, there was a soldier of profession and a general, and one of the greatest, one of the most capable, let's say at least commanders in the Prussian army at that point, but that actually had an enormous success with the Vom Kriege among civilians fundamentally. And this partly explains why, but we have repeated these things over and over again on the specific context, the positivistic stance that here von Clausewitz is criticizing, the idea that you can attain a positive achieve a positive understanding of war just by, theorizing, abstracting from reality. Well, that's not how it works. Excuse me, I drink a little bit. Excuse me. Here we go again. There was a time I did this every second because I didn't stop the video, but now I was, the audio recording at least. I was too lazy now to stop it, so you had to listen to me drinking. Aside from this, okay, so this is actually what the title of this paragraph means. This explains the rapid growth of great generals, and why a general is not a man of learning. Right here, the rapid growth, as we will see, is the deal. Like in the sense that those people who get it don't need a great deal of preparation to get there, right? They will do it anyway, and that's why the general, like meant as a commander, is like it can be a man of learning, but as such, has nothing to do with being a man of learning. In order to get there, that's the concept, which is not, it's an anti-intellectualist, but not an anti-intellectual stand here from Clausewitz. Okay. So, going on, in what he writes is, quote, "This result of our considerations is in fact so necessary that any other would have made us distrustful of their accuracy." Right? So here, von Clausewitz essentially reinforces all the, let's say, practical, and this method reminds closely Occam's razor, right? This is really trying to determine what the theory of the art of war is without, getting lost along the way, talking about things that are not useful, right? And the fact that here he was obviously referring to the previous paragraph where that showed that great simplification of the knowledge is required in order to create properly the theory of the art of war, not even applicating it, because we have seen how the theory of the art of war is not even concretely applicated as to apply to reality, in the sense that you have to follow it at every step. It's just a thing you have to go back on thinking when you're dealing with lots of things here that are terribly more, that are really incomprehensible, even through the theory of the art of war, for reasons that have nothing to do with that and that cannot be eliminated from war. So what he's telling us here is that that statement that knowledge has to be essentially very, very simple at the end of the day in war is in any other, especially war in every circumstance, for the sake of practicality, is a necessity, right? And any other thing that would tell us otherwise would be wouldn't be to be trusted, right? It's let's say adding extra stuff is like being really pedant at the point it's even dangerous, because at that point you're adding something unnecessary to it that will only make you lose time. So you have it to be extremely concise and capable of this synthesis that must be functional at the same time. And von Clausewitz writes, then only thus is explained how so often men have made their appearance with great success in war, and indeed in the higher ranks, even in supreme command, whose pursuits had been previously of a totally different nature. Right, and this is an interesting realization, because actually, this is something if you had asked me before reading this, whether it's the case, I agreed in the sense that I always thought that there is the kind of military versed or military genius person that arrives and starts doing things, all of a sudden, well, because he has this kind of capability. naturally, this is correct, right? But this should be also detached, and von Clausewitz actually agrees with this, that from the fact that there are certain specific contexts in which, the theory of the art of war is obviously more developed, more like advanced than in other contexts. We have seen previously in other paragraphs, Vom Kriege, von Clausewitz makes this distinction, for example, between the essentially the Europeans and other populations around the world, stating that essentially the first are kind of more advanced because they have reached, like it was in the 19th century, this dramatic level of development compared to other systems, surpassing them at a point you can start feeling the difference, right? Which is correct, which is a correct historical assessment. I mean, up to the 18th century, the Europeans were objectively not yet the most advanced population in the world. It wasn't, like China still was in the 18th century. In the 19th, things changed dramatically, and this goes in parallel with a dramatic, of course, equally a dramatic improvement in the same intellectual, like in all fields of knowledge, fundamentally, that bring to conceive even the same von Clausewitz, right, as a theorist. I mean, the Vom Kriege as such, that effectively will make a dramatic difference all over the world, historically speaking. And the 19th century is the century of European, predominion over the world throughout colonization, etc. And up to the 20th century, that this is invaried. I mean, the Europeans meant as kind of the Westerners telling the truth, but the concept here is deep, because it makes you realize that in other cultures, and especially the tribal ones, right, the primitive ones, that von Clausewitz doesn't quite characterize, but it simply tells, like, to make less generalizations. But I mean, think about the difference between, how many military geniuses had Rome or Greece compared in the ancient times, compared, I don't know, to the Celts or to the Germans or to the Numidians, right? Of course, there are fanboys of all sides who will say, yeah, no, these guys were so advanced. No, they weren't. They had primitive cultures that essentially didn't have the necessary intellectual level of development to achieve, like, a systematic military, say, culture and a system that could be passed, like, and developed effective tactics, and they didn't have the political and social structures to do that. That's the reason why. How many Hannibals were born? I don't know, even in prehistory, but they remain stuck just like hunting each other's cattle and killing each other, and not accomplishing much and not passing to history, like because exactly, even the lack of means of recording that. Well, that's exactly the point. Like, that's really realizing that you still need certain contexts when military genius, the military capabilities can flourish, right? If Napoleon's family had, I don't know, remained in the Great Duchy of Tuscany, where they were originally from, Napoleon would have been still Napoleon by certain standards. Now, we don't know. I don't want to enter into the details. I don't know, the environmental factors and how they influence the individual, etc. But it's obvious that, that the military structures of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany at the time couldn't make a Napoleon. Why? Because Napoleon rose in the play, to the ability that are to be improved over time. So there was an actual learning in this. In French military culture, that was by the time, definitely the most advanced and prestigious, right? And that's what made Napoleon effectively. There would have been no Napoleon without Gribeauval, for example, or without. And this is, by the way, what is often overlooked in this regard is that you need an environment where a fertile ground, say, where these results could be achieved thanks to these preconditions, but right, the still the way, and this is what von Clausewitz is saying in this paragraph, is that the way this happens eventually at the level, at the individual level, is in a way you can't really teach to these person, right? It's a bit like life. You can't tell a person how to live. And people need to age, to experience things, to fail, to succeed, to understand how to do things. And this is exactly what von Clausewitz is saying in a way or another. This is not strictly to do with the merely military character of this dynamic. This has to do with human ingenuity that as such can't be taught, if not marginally, right? This is a very hard lesson to learn. Like the fact that until you don't make a direct experience of certain things, you can't imagine how it is, but you really will not know how it is. And this is what von Clausewitz is really telling us in the Vom Kriege, is that you can make it's not even a matter of being optimistic about your capacities, but it's the concept of abstraction and of pretense of that you can easily obtain that result that makes other people, competent people, understand that you're not fit for it because you have never quite experienced that. But you at this point you actually still don't understand that it's not the case. That's not how it really happens. You can't determine that, especially in war, right? So what von Clausewitz is stressing in this phrase is, however, rather how people who had really not seem to be of particular ingenuity or capacity or reliability demonstrate themselves to be successful. And naturally, this is not like an acquired, like a proper quality of the individual that can't be erased. Like, people change continuously, so first of all, it's very difficult, historically speaking, this is what also von Clausewitz stresses, to actually assess whether in a particular circumstance maybe a commander was just lucky, right? And this is why also you need to study repeated events, because theoretically even all of these events, repeated victories, could be all due to factors of like luck. And it's always the case, but it could be also the case that, I don't know, the enemy is even worse than you are, so maybe you achieve something, but at the same time there is not a great deal that you actually made over the average at that point. So and this story repeats itself over and over again, right? That's also why actually, like, actual military accomplishments should always be studied as not, this guy won or lost. It's rather, how that happened, right? Because it's not really about denying the fact that someone got defeated, because that's, you can't, once you're defeated, it's over. So you have lost anyway, so you're the loser, right? That's not the point. The point is understanding how much the winner at that point is actually able to repeat that. For example, how did it achieve that? It's important, right? Even if you can't exclude the outcome as such, because that is most of the times actually the most sound evidence that you have in order to judge a particular military engagement, right? And that's also methodologically important for analyzing military history. And von Clausewitz goes on and says this other very interesting thing is indeed how, as a rule, the most distinguished generals have never risen from the very learned or really erudite class of officers, but have been mostly men who, from the circumstances of their position, could not have attained to any great amount of knowledge, right? The interesting fact of this statement is that von Clausewitz says pretty explicitly that not only the best generals um, emerge fundamentally almost all the time from the non-erudite class of officers, right, or the very well learned, let's say. And I think here it's referring to the strictly military education, but that most of the times they emerge from positions that had nothing to do with that level of education proper, right? And so this is meaningful because it's as if von Clausewitz wasn't just criticizing the fact that randomly and statistically, there is always, like, if you consider how rare it is to have a good general, like a very distinguished general, it's very likely that this person will maybe emerge unexpectedly. But here he's saying more. He's saying that, I mean, even if officers were all well learned, etc., von Clausewitz seems to say that it's still unlikely that among these men such great commanders would emerge. Which is kind of strange. I mean, when I read this paragraph, I had my share of doubt. Like, I don't, not much about von Clausewitz, but about, whether I correctly understand this passage or not. But he's really stating that. And in my opinion, this is von Clausewitz's criticism, effective criticism, towards, in fact, this group of people that want to be extremely highly theoretical and perfect and perfectionist, rather, and extremely accurate and respected and appreciated for their military knowledge, and then these guys are regularly beaten in terms of capability by people who didn't come from that background and that developed their own capacities, let's say, from other qualities or other applications, fundamentally, that are more important than having this, apparent education. I say apparent because it's I'm trying to relate to things that happen to me. That I am a bit harsh sometimes against the general approach to military history, for example, that there is in popular culture, even by those people who are allegedly kind of the most expert or the most authoritative, let's say, better, and or that are reputedly so, by the way, around, right? I think that actual expertise and competence come from paths that are really, in fact, not so mainstream as you may think. In fact, military historians are a pretty strange group of people by themselves, and I can't say that because I think I belong to them, right? I hope, at least, because that's what I would like to be. Namely, I don't care to be a medievalist, effectively. I would like more to be conceived as a military historian, even if on Schwerpunkt we still don't actually talk so openly and so concretely about what this means and how you could test that effectively. And I think, for example, I'm a particularly talented person in this regard, but what I think von Clausewitz is saying here is that a highly speculative, I don't know even whether it's this, because I was saying so highly theorized, right, group of people is actually the best key for obtaining some, because theory is fine, right? Here we are effectively struggling to delineate a theory of the art of war, right? But at the same time, this is the point von Clausewitz makes, you need practice. Like, it's like when, as a military historian, you say, okay, I've read tons of books about military history, and yeah, therefore I know what it means. If you've never actually carried out a strategical or tactical analysis on the base of all existing sources or in a specific event, like, you can have read as much as you like, but you don't quite know by which degree certain things are concretely there. And the point is, not even at that point you can't even quantify that properly, but you have this kind of sixth sense, this esprit de finesse, let's say, that helps you to to realize to how to have to cope in that situation. So I think this is what von Clausewitz is genuinely talking about, is naturally an invitation to all those people who feel that objectively there is too much talk and too few actual commitment about certain issues, that it's as if even historians, like, but okay, let's not categorize this, but people in general, okay, just repeat what they hear, and they tend to stick to an authority, to feel part of the group, to share that sense of victory, of satisfaction, of being, from the right side, having looking the right color from the outside and saying, I belong to this, I wave this flag that I'm the right one. And this is objectively a very dangerous thing, because it doesn't habituate people to actually reason with their own mind, but just to behave in herds, right? And that's not good. I mean, that's good for those people who effectively manage to command, but it's detrimental to actual criticism, right? In fact, we are living in a society that is increasingly factionalized in this regard and bipolarized, which is not even so bad in all. But we have this problem now that instead of effectively trying to distinguish, like, I am either from this side or the other, we tend to define ourselves in function of, like, I'm part of this group, more than, like, I own this opinion because I effectively matured it through knowledge, right? Through knowledge meant as experience and as practical acknowledgement proper, right? So these are difficult topics. Maybe we'll have to, difficult. Yeah, they're difficult and also kind of complex and complicated, so maybe we'll make a dedicated video to it. But I think here it is really what von Clausewitz is referring to. And von Clausewitz now specifies, in fact, a little bit better also what this kind of learning actually means, because he says, on that account, those who have considered it necessary or even beneficial to commence the education of future general by instruction in all details have always been ridiculed as absurd pedants, right? And this is kind of interesting because he said they have always been ridiculed, right? So there is this common awareness that this is the case, right? That objectively, yeah, trying to tell, what every soldier has to do step by step by manual in battle is kind of stupid, because that doesn't happen. Like, you have to be concise, you have to be concrete, and you have to tell them, those bunch of things are going to happen, having them trained properly for it, but just, leaving. And what is interesting, in fact, in Clausewitzian legacy that would build up the military culture of the second German Empire is exactly this freedom, this autonomy that was left to officers, those who had to take action rapidly on the field, especially. That is to say, okay, you have to be inventive, you have to stay open, you don't have to just obey kind of a specific pattern, you have to exploit every situation that you deem fit for it, and that you have that responsibility. Then if you get killed and together with all your men, it's your responsibility, but it starts from this realization that objectively it's still better to do that and to entrust that amount of autonomy to those who are there in front of reality than waiting for the order from people that are not even there, right? So this dynamism that the same instruction of the general requires as a realization more than an actual education about because this is deemed as an absurdity, right? Education through this instruction in all details is like, there's maybe a part of it that has to do with, if you go in the military, you know that there are a bunch of useless things that you're obliged to do, but that has to do just for training you psychologically to the fact of, you have to obey, point, and you have to learn what that means, even if that thing it's for nothing, right? But you still enter in that mindset, right? And I can tell you it works. Like, it makes you really feel as if you have gotten something from that. But obviously, that is kind of level zero of what you have to realize. If you really want even to be a military man in that regard, then you start building something else that should pass through practice, through training, to dedicate to experience, right? So, and it's a difficult path. There is no easy way to, like, you can't leave a person uneducated or untrained relatively to military matters, but still, the person who will effectively rise from the rest of these would be commanders are those who effectively own this capacity that goes beyond what they've been manualistically taught about war. This is a great realization, and it's difficult. I can't say in this paragraph I find myself more than much, in the sense that these are still things I had that not quite thought about in detail, but this is to be remembered, because it truly breaks every type of preconception about what you can do on the field, right? One thing is, listening to this at the point it's just theoretical, that things are more difficult than what they seem and nobody can predict them. Well, it's kind of even easy to say. I mean, it's not banal to say. It's one of the single most important things you can say, probably most important one. But another thing is realizing that this actually goes, it's applied to individuals, and you realize that most of the times actually you're not that special compared to others. There is always the person who is not just better than you, but that is also kind of got it sent for very well, and you still lag behind consistently, right? And so that is also a lesson of life you have to learn at one point. But this naturally leaves room for further improvement. I mean, von Clausewitz is actually very, very stern, but fair about this. Like, he doesn't tell you that everybody can be someone in this field, but he also tells you that you don't have to give anything for granted in this regard. So everybody can do something good, and possibly better than anyone else, right? The only problem is finding that way, which is what most life is about, especially in terms of career, etc. But okay, this is another story. Just for saying that you can't relate to this, even if you talk about job, and this is not just about war. And then von Clausewitz writes, "It would be easy to show the injurious tendency of such a course, because the human mind is trained by the knowledge imparted to it and the direction given to its ideas." This phrase, in my opinion, means essentially that you get what like it's a great compliment to human mind, right? And the Vom Kriege actually is, not just because it's been written by one of the most brilliant minds ever existed, but it's simply because von Clausewitz tells us that there is nothing like experience, and therefore what you can directly learn by yourself compared to what other people can teach you. Like, this is probably one of the most fundamental assumptions you have to bear in mind, that everything is, let's say, remains theoretical as long as you make it be theoretical. You have to pass to practice at one point, and although theory is important, still practice overwhelms it at the moment you have to cope with the situation, right? So this is easily, we could make tons of examples about this, but what von Clausewitz is telling you here is that do not let yourself indoctrinate by a system that actually is merely, you have just heard it from someone else. This is a great lesson, because we should all lend an ear to everyone, even to people that we think they're wrong, right? Because that can help us dramatically. But what we have to do eventually should be based on what we think, we realize it is right, not because someone told us, but because we have acknowledged it ourselves. Otherwise, we just basically follow someone else, doing things that do not belong to us ethically, right? Even if we decide that we agree with them, but we need to pass through an actual realization to this, and this has enormous implications, as you understand, because this has actually to do, even, think at all the people who criticized stupidly, by the way, very stupidly, von Clausewitz for having caused, I don't know, having, rendered possible for, I don't know, Nazi Germany to invade half of Europe, because they were following essentially the Prussian military doctrine deriving from, Clausewitzian thought. That has literally nothing to do with it. Also because, by the way, already the rest of the world was reasoning with that. The Soviets were Clausewitzians as well, just for instance. And what he's really telling you here is that when you do something, because in that specific case, the idea is that we should trust our leaders, right? We should trust our dictator. We should trust our society, our system. And the system failed miserably. Like, there is no need to explain what happened. And why did it happen? Because these people had sclerotized, essentially, the Clausewitzian thought, to the point is that we have to follow this as a dogma, without even kind of reading, but just, trying to understand it on our own, but essentially listening to what its interpreters have to teach us, because we have to blindly obey them, and then essentially going, and perhaps, but this happened with the Nazis, for example. This happened also with the communists, also after World War II. I mean, they misinterpreted von Clausewitz at the same time. And still, they had a higher Clausewitzian culture than some Western countries, so that they actually did well militarily in certain contexts. But at the same time, even certain assumptions have gone completely off track. They screwed up badly, because simply they thought they got in love with themselves, with they mixed, of course, Marxism with it, but all the nonsensical, political dogmas revolt, and they lost their open-mindedness, and that's what failed. They made them fail. Right? It's a history of failure, and there's no worse failure than one that exists in a war. Right? So that's another proof, by the way, that von Clausewitz is not has been regularly misunderstood. Not because he can give you victory, right? That's not his point. He by definition is telling you the exact contrary, right? It's because people have thought that this was the winning card, and they simply followed whoever was kind of waving it, and that's how they ended up pretty badly. So von Clausewitz is telling you something completely different that also exists at an ethical level, even for not following something like National-Socialism or communism or any other abomination of human civilization like these that have essentially decided that there is only one truth that they presume they have identified, right? As if truth, the problem with truth is the truth does exist. That means being a moral not being a moral relativist. The problem is that you should also know that you can't achieve the knowledge of the truth by definition. So these people instead presumed they did, and that's where they caused, in fact, the worst atrocities of the whole mankind. Because they're a bunch of fanatics, they're nothing else. They're from the wrong side of history, and they will always lose. The only problem is that will make, hundreds of millions of people dying together with them, which is far much worse. And anyway, do not think all these people were completely innocent from it as well, because they were part of the same delusion. But aside from this, von Clausewitz is really telling you reason with your mind, because the only thing that can prevent you from falling into these traps is you reasoning with your own mind. Alleged knowledge thinks that effectively you do not know, and that you can't know until you test them. That's the real problem with that. This is a real thing, right? this is, you have to make your own work. Von Clausewitz is not serving you the magic pill that makes everything fine and you're done. Yay, we're gonna make it, pull it off. No. What he's telling you is that you have to spit blood in order to do the best choice, because the responsibility, by the way, falls exclusively on your head. So if you fail, it backfires on you, also on other people, but you're the one who causes this. So this is an enormous moral responsibilization that von Clausewitz is showing here. It all starts from your mind. So never think that since there is a group of people that tells you that, yeah, it's simply that way, you follow them and say, okay, well, I'm from this side that seems to be the right one, because, there are many. Until maybe you're, I don't know, maybe you're even from the right side, because objectively, the problem is that your mind is not even anywhere, practically, because you're just being, going, after someone you don't even realize what he's talking about. And this is happening increasingly often. I mean, it has always happened. It's normal. We are biologically programmed to behave like this, instinctively speaking. But then we have reason, right? Which works in a bit of a different way. That's what von Clausewitz tells you. Use reason, and do not use in this sense a pre-packed, set of information that someone told you, it works, and you don't know whether it works or not, right? Which von Clausewitz, what he's saying here is not that. I mean, people who study war, think how it is, are generally stupid or incapable. He's simply saying that until these guys do not test effectively, what that means is that they're gonna make mistakes. Okay, well, I think that the concept is clear the way it is, but it's still important to reiterate it, because I think this is all where the greatness also of the Clausewitzian moral lays. Many people don't think this is an actual philosophical work, in the sense that it really wants to help you at a human level. It truly does. And the way he does that is he doesn't indulge in, garbage flattering yourself. He's simply telling you, look, this is what is going to happen. What do you want to do about it? Just test whether it's like I say or not, and that you will understand. You are the one in charge here. And that's why it's so empowering to study the Vom Kriege as well, because it really makes you a participant of this, always assuming that you're willing to actually do something about it. Because if you simply read Vom Kriege and that you have never thought about, studying war seriously, well, yeah, I mean, it's a read that it's advised to anyone, but you're still losing a part. This is very precious for whoever really wants to understand war and politics as well. So von Clausewitz concludes with this phrase and says, only what is great can make it great. The little can only make it little if the mind itself does not reject it as something repugnant. Right? So this is really important. Like, you have to really talk about, this is a good example, because it's like there's people who just imagine, so I promise I will make a video on this topic, but many people like to learn, for example, military history through the internet, because rightfully they maybe don't have other means, or they just do it to kill the time or something, like a hobby, and they assume that we are all very lazy at all times, but if you want to do something well, you should do it well, in fact. And doing it well implies that you should be a bit more thorough in your, and not approximating just for the sake of it, because like you collect stuff here and there, right? And you try to stick it together. Like there is let's say an obvious path that begins by adding this idea of adding piece by piece, like, I don't know, I learned this thing about this battle, fine, which is small but precious, and I will remember it. Then I learned this other thing about this battle, and you go on. There was stuff read on the internet, but effectively, those are all details. They do not teach you to learn at a grand level. They don't make you see the whole picture. That's why I insist a lot, actually, on having pretty diversified, let's say, historical interests in this regard. I mean, many people objectively come close to history because they are interested in a specific field, right? It can be enormous on its own, but that fundamentally doesn't quite that gets quite compartmentalized as such, sectorialized, and this is also largely how our markets are working today. Like, even think about we will hold, like, think about art, or even the same education, and the way it's done through entertainment. Sometimes it's become very sectorial. Like, who does these things for making money usually doesn't lack actual quality or intelligence in this sense, but they just do what is minimal to achieve that target, because we're all characterized as targets in a different way. And they have found out, as producers, naturally, that the person who is just, I don't know, in love with Vikings doesn't give a damn about something that, is actually historically accurate, because guess why? That person knows only about the Vikings. And that's how the whole thing more or less works. So I presume, actually, that over time we will manage to educate people better, right? To have a more comprehensive knowledge and understanding of reality, of the world, of politics and society. But let's say that there are people who exploit this current fragmentation, and it exasperates and increases in turn this fragmentation, this compartmentalization, and sectorialization of knowledge, of interests. Everything is customized. Everything is not really there for teaching you something the harshest way to actually make you understand the lesson of your life. They're there just to flatter you, to flatter your interests, but in this sense also your weaknesses, your faults, your laziness, right? Instead, knowledge passes only through something that smashes you straight in the face, and that will really teach you something concrete about life. This is at least how I see it, but I presume this is what really von Clausewitz is talking about, right? It would be very interesting, if he had seen this world, if he had understood it, to tell us how much this, he, as you understand, he's relatively concise in his way of expressing himself. He doesn't indulge into so many, comments and criticism of his own. He was not interested in it, because this text is objectively self-standing, right? Then I can waste, let's say, all these hours trying to, which are not wasted, but at least for me, but to comment them and to, improperly comment them, I would say, because all what is needed here to understand is contained in this. But this is a text that does require an exegesis objectively, and that helps you to, let's say, acquaints you to these thinking in a quite subtle way. I suspect that von Clausewitz, while writing this work, was actually thinking about making you understand something, try to be, not less explicit as possible, because he's very direct, but making you more than else entering into a specific mindset. That is what effectively is the most concrete message of this work, and that is incidentally what this theory of the art of war practically is. It's something you can't quite catch concretely. You can't quantify. You can't build as a definite structure, but that is there, and it makes your mind work, and it does produce wealth. It does produce intelligence and knowledge, and it helps people really to better themselves, also ethically speaking, because it makes them work reason with their own head. That's why this thing is so misunderstood, because this thing has to be like chewed over time. Like you can't take it all in one shot. I have heard people that pretended to value the Vom Kriege just by listening to an audio track of the Vom Kriege read, spoken, told just like that. I don't know, in 2 hours or whatever, how it lasted, I don't know, and to say I know from Clausewitz, yeah. Here we are going on. We made 90 videos, and I think they are at least 1 hour long each. So here we've spent all this time just to, essentially introduce the work, because we're still partly to the 1/3 of the work, not even, right? So, and I'm glad we've taken really this time, step by step, right? I don't know what is coming out of this. Like, I don't know whether I see you keep not watching this. I see you don't care. So I realize, and I know it's understandable. I don't blame you as such for doing this, but I realize at the same time that at least I worry about this concept being delivered, right? This is also my comment. I haven't read an enormous much about von Clausewitz myself. Don't think I have this. I'm evidently just an amateur for what concerns von Clausewitz. I know, like, let's say, certain things about him. We will see, especially when we will get there. In certain concepts that are very, very important. I know how they've been misunderstood historically, historiographically, etc. But I will see them better when we'll get there. But for now, this is really getting lost into a track that is fairly easy to follow if you have the patience to just concretely understand what he's referring to. This is not a manual. People do treat it as a manual. It's not a manual by definition. And the reason the people don't understand generally Vom Kriege and criticize it is that they think it's a manual, which means they haven't read it. Because this text is saying the very exact opposite about itself. And that's one of the greatest realizations. And I don't know why I need to explore more. I must confess, I've always been very fascinated by the amount of criticism that exists about Vom Kriege, right? And I would like to explore it better, if anything, to expose the mistakes and how they come, mentally speaking, right, about this, because I'm fascinated. I realized this work is not one of the simplest to approach, but the easiest to approach. Let's put it in this way. But it's also fairly intelligible. Like you don't have to make this enormous effort to try to at least get it what is talking effectively about, and not just the usual list of concepts you can find. I don't know, you Google that, simply from Clausewitz theory, and then like 1 or 2 pages of condensated Clausewitzian thought with quotes and generalized synthesis. You can do that too, but if you don't read this, you lose all the juice of what this really is about, right? And alright, well, I will silence myself now because I've been rambling as usual too much. But for now, just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channels if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.